Well, hello and welcome again to our reading of Thucydides Book 1, the Pentakontaetia, and we're up to chapter 101. Thasioi de Nikathentes Makai kai Polyakoumenai Lacedaemonius Epikalunto kai Apomunain Ekelion es belontes es ten Atticaen. So the Thasians, the people of Thasos, this is again as this island, and up north of the island was the mine, and the Thasians had a very important interest there. So the Thasians, having been conquered in a battle and being besieged, Epikalunto, they called upon the Spartans, and Ekelion, they bid them, they asked them, Apomunain, to defend them, and then we get the participle by, having invaded Attica. The idea being, of course, if the Spartans invaded Attica, then the Athenians would have to bring their troops home from Thasos in defence, and then the Thasians would be saved. Hoi de hup eskonto min krufaton Athenaion kai emelon de koluthesen de hupa tu genomenu sesmu. And they, this is the Spartans, hup eskonto, they promised. We get a nice men and a balancing debt here. They promised krufa plus the genitive here without the knowledge of, so secretly of the Athenians, so without the knowledge of the Athenians, kai emelon, and they were just on the verge of doing it, but dia koluthesan, they were hindered, they were prevented by to genomenu seismu, by an earthquake occurring. Enho, in which, now we get a chi and a chi, so both the Helots, these of course were these slaves, these servants that they had. The Helots were in fact natives that had been reduced to servile status back in the 7th and 8th centuries, and so they're Helots, and of the Perioiki, now these are the so-called dwellers around, so these were non-Spartan citizens who were not slaves, but they ran most of the commerce and provided food and so on. So the Perioiki, and we get two groups of these mentioned, the Thuriatai and the Aithei. So the earthquake occurred in which both the Helots and the Thuriatai and the Aithei among the Perioiki, apestesan, they led a revolt into Ithome. Both of these groups are in the eastern section of Messenia. Well, they had probably had revolts of the Helots before, but the fact that the Perioiki were revolting as well probably did frighten the Spartans to a large degree. Pleistoi de ton Heloton egenetot hoi ton Palaion Messenian toti dulathenton apogenoi. So the majority of the Helots were, hoi goes with the apogenoi in the next line, so were the descendants of the ancient Messenians who at that time had been enslaved. Passive participle here. Hey, for this reason, this is one of these elliptical terms, again, there's no antecedent. So for this reason also, all of them were called Messenians, even though some of them were not from this. It just says the majority were, but all of them for this reason were called Messenians. Pros min un tous enithomi polemus katasteke Lacedaemonius. And therefore a war was established. So there was a war against those in Ithome for the Spartans. Thasioi detrito ete polyokumenoi homologesan Athenaios tekos de Helontes kai naos paradontes cremata de hose ede apodunai autica taxaminoi kai ta loipon ferein. And then ten de eperan kai ta metalon aphentes. So as a result of this, the Thasians do not get any relief. So the Thasians, being besieged in the 3rd year, they came to an agreement with the Athenians, homologio, and having pulled down their wall and Parodontes handing over their fleet, their ships, having arranged Apodunai to give back Autica immediately the money as much as was necessary. So remember, we saw before that many of these places were in arrears, so they hadn't paid their tribute, so that's why he uses Apodunai to give back the money which they owed, so as much as was necessary. And Ferein has this use of paying tribute here, and in future to pay the tribute. Aphentes giving up the mainland. Remember that Thasos is just below a section of the mainland up in Thrace that was controlled by the Thasians, and the Metalon and the mine. That's the end of chapter 101. We'll continue on to chapter 102. Lacedaemonioi de hos autois prostus enithome eme cuneta hopolemos alus te epicalesan tomacus kai Athenaios. But the Spartans, when Polemos, the war against those in Ithome, well, this means was extended, so was dragging on autos for them. So when the war continued to drag on for them, the Spartans, Epicalisanta, they called upon other allies, Kai Athenaios and the Athenians. Hoi de Aelthon, and they came with Cimon as general. Genitive absolute there. Not with a small force, so with a large force. Greek loves to use litotes, where you say not the opposite of what you're trying to say, so with a large force. Now it's important that he mentions Cimon here, because Cimon is very pro-Spartan in his politics. Malista de autus epicalasanto hoti tecomacain edocun dunatai aenai. And they invited them, that is the Athenians, especially hoti because edocun, they seemed to be dunatai, very powerful, very good at tecomacain, at siegecraft, at fighting on walls, literally, so at siegecraft. toiste, but for them, that is for the Spartans. Unfortunately, we have to go to the next page. Polyoikias, so we'll keep that in our heads there. Polyoikias makras, kathestequias, tuto endia ephinato. So, but for them, that is the Spartans, and we get a genitive absolute from polyoikias makras, kathestequias, a long siege having happened, having set in, so there being a long siege, endia, need of this ephinato appeared. So they were not used to engaging in sieges, so for them, since a long siege had set in, their lack of experience in this, their need of this, appeared. Biaiga an helon tokorion. Now we have a little ellipsis here, we have to understand for otherwise. So for otherwise, helon an, they would have taken the land, biai, by force. Kai diaphora ektautes tes strateas proton lacedaemonios kai athenaios phanera egeneto. This is a very important sentence, really, because it says that as a result of this campaign, for the first time, the phanera goes with the diaphora, literally a visible dispute. So an open dispute occurred for the Spartans and the Athenians, or perhaps between the two might even be better. So as a result of this campaign, for the first time, an open disagreement or dispute occurred between the Spartans and the Athenians. Hoiga Lacedaemonioi, for the Spartans, when tokorion bia uk helisketo. Now this verb is from haliskomai, and haliskomai is used as a passive for the verb hyreo, to take, and haliskomai is used as the passive form of that verb, to be taken. So the subject is tokorion. So when the place was not taken, by force, they, the Spartans, desantes, terrified of the tolmeron, the daring of the Athenians, kaiten neateropoian, this is a lovely word, possibly a neologism, I'm not sure whether it occurs earlier, but it means the revolutionary behaviour, revolutionary action, perhaps revolutionary spirit of the Athenians. So they were frightened of that. Kai and Hama at the same time, Hegesamenoi, regarding them as allophulus. So the Spartans, of course, are Dorians, and the Athenians are not. They're essentially from Ionian stock. So at the same time, considering them to be, well, not of the same race, not of the same stock. And then after verbs of fearing, we get may. They feared lest tit, in some way, and for an, if they might remain, that pesthentes, having been persuaded by those in Ithome, near Terissosi, they might attempt some sort of revolution. From near Terisdo. Given all of that, epempsan, they sent them literally alone among the allies. So they were the only ones among the allies that they sent away. Ten men hupopsian u deluntes, not making clear their suspicion, but saying that uden prostiontai auton eti, that they were in need of nothing further auton from them. Hoi de Athenaioi egnosan uk epiten beltioni logoi apopempomenoi alatinos hupoptu genomenu kai denon poiesamenoi kai uk axiosantes hupad lacedaimonion tuta pathane euthus epede anekaresan. The Athenians did not take very gladly to this, and in fact Cimon was ostracized for 10 years as a consequence of that, because of his part. He was part of the Athenian pro-Spartan faction. Of course, his opposition to Ephialtes and Pericles' reforms didn't help his case either, but the Athenians took this very, very badly, and the pro-Spartan faction back at Athens did not suffer well. So he says here, the Athenians recognized uk epi to beltioni logo apopempomenoi, that they were sent back literally not for the better reason, so not for the more creditable reason, but that some suspicion had arisen. Kai denon poiesamenoi, and regarding it as a terrible thing, kai uk axios santos, and not having been treated with respect by the Spartans, so to have suffered this, not being treated with respect by the Spartans. So when all that happened, when immediately they withdrew, apokorio, so when they withdrew, so at that time, immediately they withdrew, having Aphentes, so having abandoned Tain Sumakian, the alliance which had taken place against the Mede, against the Persians. Parautus, I think is something like with them, that is with the Spartans. Sumakoi egenonto, they became allies, Argaios, with the Argives, that is the people of Argos, who were the enemy, or who were hostile, or enemies, ekanon, of that group, that is of the Spartans. So they withdrew their alliance with Sparta, and they made an alliance with the Argives, who were Spartans' enemies, and with the Thessalians. At the same time, the same oaths and alliance kateste was set up, amphoteros, for both parties. That is, between the Athenians and the Argives, and the Athenians and the Thessalians. And that is the end of chapter 102.